The film begins with the country's President of the United States declaring that the government is doing everything in its power to ensure that their way of life can continue. He assures us that our top priority is to ensure the safety of all Americans. Later, it turns out that most of humanity has been wiped out by a biochemical weapon catastrophe, making the air unbreathable. For this reason, the US government appears to have built some makeshift underground bunkers to keep some scientists in cryogenic sleep until the air is no longer toxic. Each bunker is maintained by several workers who wake up for 2 hours every 6 months. The next scene introduces two employees of such a facility named Bauer and Cartwright. Bauer wakes up from his sleep and vomits out of the capsule. He's an engineer by profession, so he starts looking at some computer screens before his colleague Cartwright wakes up. Later, during his wake-up cycle, the two of them work on his regular to-do list. They tested the air quality above and found it to still be toxic. I also notice staff from other properties have already checked in. However, interagency communication does not appear to be possible. Cartwright goes through the photos of his friends and family and Bauer reminds them they are all dead. Bauer then gave him some data to investigate, only to find that there was seismic activity. So they check on other sleepers to make sure everything is okay. Meanwhile, Cartwright sees a photograph of his wife. Abby hallucinates that she is next to him. Bauer sees a vision of her wife and tries to talk to her, but is unhappy with her distraction. Cartwright believes that the sleepers are still alive and that they are the future of humanity. He even came up with a formula for determining how long he slept. Based on his calculations, he predicts he may need at least 20 more sleep shifts. However, Bauer whines that the two are wasting their lives to survive the sleeper. Unfortunately, recent seismic activity caused Cartwright's bedroom to catch fire just before the 2-hour mark. He yells at Bauer to bring him a fire extinguisher, but when he manages to put out the fire, the sleeping pod is destroyed. Bauer also injured his hand. When the stopwatch reaches 0, the light goes off and the airflow stops. Cartwright uses a flashlight to read the manual and learns that there is an emergency bypass. They frantically searched for an emergency air valve, managed to find it, and turned it on. The two share personal information about themselves while waiting for the air feed to start. Bauer admitted to having a wife and 3 daughters, and one of the conditions of the job was that he was unmarried, so he chose to lie. Power is restored shortly thereafter, the backup air supply is turned on, and he has his clock reset for another 2 hours. Immediately, the two go to find an empty room in the warehouse. Unfortunately, I can't find any storage and will have to look for another storage option for her. Cartwright is severely claustrophobic, but he uses the map to get to the basement. Luckily, their hard work paid off and they found a spare room that they could bring back to the facility and set up. Once it's done, Cartwright suggests they go to bed first in case anything goes wrong. However, he hesitated for a moment, so Bauer decided to go inside instead. When the capsule was activated, Bauer heard a leaking sound and noticed that the air inside was thinning. As Cartwright watches, Bauer yells frantically to let him out, but Cartwright cannot hear him. Suddenly, the room malfunctions, sucking Bauer in and suffocating him. He was about to die an agonizing death, but Cartwright arrived just in time to free him and set him free. However, it also destroys the chamber in the process. There are no more vacant rooms left in the facility, so Mr. Bauer insists that sleeping people be ejected to make room. Cartwright refuses, saying they have a duty to care for these people and keep them alive. But Bauer argues that we should prioritize our own survival over the survival of others. Cartwright finally relents and considers putting one of the sleepers to sleep with morphine. But at that moment he saw another hallucination of Abby and was convinced there must be another way. Bauer sees his hesitation and decides to do it himself, but Cartwright stops him, saying they are not murderers. This leads to a light-hearted altercation that ends after both are exhausted. They then examine the blueprints and discover code ABC belonging to another facility. Cartwright argues that ABC's facility is adjacent to theirs and may contain spare parts. Upon hearing this, Mr. Bauer warns that achieving this goal would require unsealing the air, potentially releasing toxic air. They know the mission is dangerous, but they must complete it. Having no other choice, Cartwright puts on his protective gear and exits the facility while Bauer radios orders. En route, Cartwright encountered a large amount of blue dust, which Bauer identified as air pollution. The latter also fixed some cameras to make it easier to navigate. In the next scene, Cartwright finds the entrance to the sister facility, but finds it jammed with locks. However, with some advice from Bauer, I was finally able to enter. Inside, he was shocked to learn that the facility had been dormant for so long and that everyone who died there had died. This leaves Cartwright desperate about his chances of survival, but at that moment he encounters another hallucination of Abby. She encouraged him to hold on to her strength and persevere until his last breath. Bauer, meanwhile, pointed to an air's haft about 10 meters away. Due to claustrophobia, Cartwright was initially hesitant to enter the canal, but had no other choice. Once inside, you'll encounter a large number of corpses, making the situation even more difficult. Bauer tries to strengthen her signal, as the radio signal weakens as she progresses. He looked for the knife, but it was in his toolbox instead of where he had put it previously. This aroused his suspicions and he decided to review the video footage and find out how the knife got there. After watching the footage, he is shocked to discover that Cartwright was standing next to him the entire time he nearly suffocated in the spare room. This suggests that the latter may have tried to kill him but changed his mind at the last moment. Cartwright, meanwhile, sensed that something was wrong. Finally he made his way to the facility and started looking around. The ceiling opens to the surface of the planet, and looking outside reveals that the city has been destroyed by an atomic bomb. Cartwright claims this must have happened long ago. Later, when he explores the area, he finds all of his bedrooms destroyed. The computer system had reported that all of the facility's employees were alive and well during the previous wake cycle, but this is a ruse to keep them sane and make them believe they are not alone. It seems that Mr. Bauer is shocked by the video footage and declares that the whole system is a lie and that no one can be trusted. Cartwright also begins to think they may be the only survivors. Now that he was out of breath, he returned to his facility. He reaches the door and begins the decontamination process. On the other side of the door he saw Bauer with a knife in his hand and asked where he found it. Cartwright realizes that Bauer knows the truth and asks him to let him in to explain. Bauer, however, was enraged and pointed a gun at Cartwright, accusing him of trying to kill him. He also sees Cartwright as a threat to both himself and the sleepers. When Bauer refuses entry, Cartwright gasps and rushes back to the ABC facility. At some point he can no longer find an exit and gets lost. At the same time, he experiences another vision of his wife, who points him to an air duct. Meanwhile, Bauer chides him over the radio, saying that what hurt him most was betrayal and lying. However, Cartwright ignored him and continued on his way, and he returned to his facility. He removes his protective gear and attempts to enter the facility's control room, but Bauer stops him with a gun and threatens to shoot him. Cartwright immediately crouched down and hid himself, trying to persuade him, stressing that they might be the only survivors. Despite this, Bauer continues to stalk Cartwright inside the facility, claiming he is too scared to let him go in his sleep. After a long chase, Cartwright finally escapes to the infirmary, where he is given morphine. He thought of using it to murder his colleague, but he got cold feet again. As Cartwright broods, Abby appears before him, urging him to kill Bauer or else he will. She convinces him that they should be able to be together in the future. Cartwright follows Abby's encouragement and returns to the control room with the gas cylinder. But suddenly Bauer appeared from behind and shot him in the shoulder. Cartwright lies on the ground, bleeding, and shows Bauer the photograph, begging for mercy. Meanwhile, he also starts talking to Abby, but Bauer yells that there is no one here. Cartwright uses a distraction to attack Bauer and drop his weapon. He then escapes the control room before he can do any more damage. Bauer, meanwhile, takes a picture, goes to the sleeping pod, and finds a matching picture. Realizing Cartwright's wife is in her sleeper, she threatens to come out or kill Abby. The situation becomes very precarious, but Cartwright finally gains the upper hand by sneaking up on Bauer and injecting him with a large dose of morphine. Bauer turns him and aims the gun at Cartwright, who quickly holds him down and drops it to the ground. As morphine begins to take over his body, Bauer accepts his fate and reconciles with Cartwright. He asks his colleague to take care of his wife before he faints forever. Cartwright then enters a sleeping pod, where he mutters to himself that he is the only one left who can keep this place functional before he goes into cryosleep. In the epilogue, Cartwright awakens to another cycle, but he looks decades older this time. When the furniture system automatically awakens the sleeper's capsules also begin to open one by one. Everyone, including Abby, exits the room and heads to the surface. The film ends with Cartwright approaching his wife, tearfully embracing him, and finally reuniting after many years. End. Conclusion: in a post-apocalyptic world, a government's desperate measures for survival lead to a tale of betrayal and perseverance. As two men struggle to sustain life in underground bunkers, visions of loved ones and a fight for control unravel their reality, culminating in a final, bittersweet reunion under the surface of a devastated planet.